All right. Good morning. It's Stacey Mahoy. I'm here today with Gordon Maclelland from Parents in Sports over in the UK. And it's in the afternoon where you're at. So you're just about ready to wrap up your day, and I'm just getting started here. So if you hear the neighborhood rooster, don't be alarmed. You might hear that in the background because it's early morning here. But I am super excited to have you here. Thank you so much for your time. I know that you're very busy as well. So I appreciate you being here.
It's great to be here. Looking forward to it.
So Gordon, like I said, CEO of Parent in Sport in the UK, and I was just super excited to find an entire website dedicated to parents and, providing them with information, resources, and things that can help them do a great job and just kind of make this youth sports experience a lot more fun and enjoyable for everyone. So why don't you give us a little bit of background as far as like your participation in sports or, your history with it and why or how this website and what you do even came about?
Yeah, so look, I guess as a young child, which feels like a long time ago now, I was a reasonable sportsman. I played county cricket, which is like regional sport over here. I had an England under-19 rugby trial as an 18-year-old, and I played a few rugby matches in our national leagues. I gave up at the age of 22, became the youngest men's rugby coach in the country. I have since worked with elite 18-year-olds, many of whom in the rugby field have gone on and played Premiership rugby in the UK and have played international rugby. I have then worked my way down the age groups, and I have done a lot of work with under-13s, and I'm currently doing some work with under-7. So in the last sort of 15, 16 years, I've managed to cover the whole sporting experience from adult through right the way down to 6-year-olds. So quite a unique, a unique journey.
Yes, for sure. So how did this website come about? Like, how did you get involved in it or what
Yeah, it came about through my own experiences with my own children. So very strange over here in the UK. I was sat with my 3-year-old son in a sports hall, playing on my phone, not really watching because I just wanted him to be running around. And I was approached by a scout of a football club, and he was only 3. Which was quite bizarre. I was very excited because you think, isn't this brilliant? Because somebody's given you good news about your child, which we're all happy to hear. And it just got me looking into the whole environment around children's sport and the best way to go about it. Because I went home from that initial meeting to try and find out some information. What do you do with the 4-year-old? What do you do with the 5-year-old? What do you do with the 6-year-old? How do you handle lots of the different parts of the sports experience? Now, I knew some of it as a coach, and I did have a sporting background. But when I started to search the internet and looked at Google, all these topics were scattered everywhere. They were in different corners of the globe. They were hidden away in the back ends of websites. And the more I got speaking to parents on the sides of pitches and got talking to them, the more I realized how poorly informed that they were, not because they were trying to do a bad job. They were doing what they thought was best for their children, but they had no access to really relevant material that they could relate to. So it was a huge driving force to put everything in one place, accessible to people of all levels of education and backgrounds, and together find a way of navigating what is a really, really tough road and a road that you can make huge mistakes. I still make huge mistakes, and I know. And I read about this every day. I'm involved in it every day. And my goodness, I can still get it wrong. So from my point of view, if you can get it wrong and you know all the information, what chance have people got who haven't been given any support whatsoever?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I kind of feel the same way. As like there's so much information out there on how to help the child perform as far as skills and drills. And, there's a lot as your recent post that was just put up there mentioned, like there's a lot on the mental aspect of the game and all of that. But I agree with you where there's very little, specifically for parents and, how do we navigate this journey and what do we do to really help our children grow into the very best and enjoy the experience so that they keep playing for a long time.
And also, Stacey, we've got to remember that parents still play the biggest role. You know, I was talking to a group of coaches in Belfast last week, and we were talking about this, that no matter what their influence is and what they do, the parental influence is still the biggest. So no matter how good the coaches think they may be doing their job, if the parents at home are doing the opposite or are not reinforcing some of those positive messages, or even, you know, dealing with some of the negative things that they see, the chances of them holistically growing as a person become more difficult.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely have seen that. So, and over the past few years, it's kind of what I've come to realize, like, just how we choose to approach situations or how we choose to think about things as parents seem to definitely have a really big influence on the experience as a whole, and kind of, you know, how our children respond to things or how they move forward through things, or maybe not. Yeah. So I was going to ask you, like, what do you feel like your role is? What do you feel like a parent's role is in this whole journey and experience for their kids?
Yeah, well, look, I think I always apologise whenever I talk anywhere, because one of the things I don't want people to ever think is that I'm not competitive. I don't want people to ever think that I'm not interested in winning. I don't want people to think that I'm one of the group that doesn't value competition, because that is so not the case. Mm-hmm. But I think it's getting things into perspective about what's important. And, you know, the work that Amanda Visek does, we always come back to this, you know, that children play for fun, and they do. Now, how we define fun, you know, it is different. There's so many different meanings. That can be from throwing hot dogs to having dirty knees to playing with your friends. It can be any of those things. I think as a parent, what we have to do is make sure that the winning part is in some form of perspective. And I always joke with this, that if you ask the children, you know, what do they value the most, winning would be well down the list. Mm-hmm. I can guarantee it's a top 3 for a parent. And I think just I guess wanting to win, but having a real sense of perspective about how little importance it actually has in the grand scheme of things is a key one.
Mm-hmm. So I have a question for you regarding when you were an athlete. Did you ever think about quitting?
Look, I ended up giving up a game that I was good at because I fundamentally didn't enjoy it. So my story is a very unique one. I loved soccer, or what we would call soccer football here. Mm-hmm. Would I have been a particularly good footballer? No, I would have probably played in about League 20. Would I still have been playing today and enjoying scoring goals? Yes, I probably would have been. And instead, I gave up a game at 22 that I was quite good at. But by the time a few injuries hit and it became more about my choices, about, or, you know, what was driving me from within, it was a very easy decision to say, do you know what, I've had enough of playing this. I'll move on to something else. Yeah. And I think that's a really key one for parents, is that although we can guide and we can push our children towards certain things, in the end, there'll come a point where it will become their decision. And we've just got to keep taking a step back, no matter how good they are at one thing. Because actually, if they're good at one thing, they'll probably be good at 10 things. We just haven't given them the opportunity to do that, because we get so caught up in, oh, we're quite good at that, so that means we must do more of that. And actually, you know, that's the wrong way to go about it.
Yeah, I think that's pretty common, is that, you know, we see our children succeeding in one thing and we're like, well, that's, you know, we should just do that. Yeah. And I mean, I even ran into that because one of my daughters, you know, I played softball. So my oldest 3 all played at least one season. And our oldest loved it. So she played all the way through high school. The second one, I actually thought was a better athlete, a better potential to be a better softball player because of just her natural ability and her size and all these things. I'm like, oh, she's going to be the one that's like even better than the first one. And she had wanted nothing to do with it. And she, you know, she's actually pretty good. And I'm like, oh man, if she just put in the same kind of effort and all these things. And it just turns out that wasn't, she wasn't playing. She just played because her friends were playing. And once we got her into other sports that she actually wanted to do, it was like a complete night and day difference in her effort levels and her commitment levels. It was just crazy to see.
Yeah.
So,
and that's where we always come back to this early specialization topic, doesn't it? That keeps cropping up, because when they're at a young age, unless they're involved in something like diving or gymnastics, there's very little need for them to be specifically focusing on one thing from such a young age. Mm-hmm. And actually, we should be encouraging them to play 4, 5, 6 different sports. And, particularly now when the science is telling us that those with a multi-sport background, by the time they get into their mid-teens or late teens, are starting to overtake some of these, early specialised peers. Yeah. We're calling on parents to be a bit bolder and say to them, look, it's not a short-term gain, this. Sport is a long-term development. Even into the 20s, we've got athletes who come out the other end. And we're in such a rush, today's society, to be brilliant from the age of 8, 9 and 10. And we've got to try and find ways of saying, no, don't panic, relax. Okay, there might be somebody better than you, but that's okay as well, because in 6 years' time, you may be better than them. If a child now is doing 30 hours a week of one sport or something ridiculous, or let's say 10 to be more realistic, and somebody's doing 3, you would hope if that was 2 8-year-olds, the person doing 10 would be better than the other one. Mm-hmm. But it doesn't mean that they necessarily will be, 5 years, 6 years down the line.
Right. Yeah, for sure. So I mentioned earlier this article regarding the one thing all parents and coaches should know. And we got to chat a tiny bit before we started. It is a rather complicated article to describe. So for those who want to look it up, it's Parents in Sport. Let's see, what is the URL for your website?
Parentsinsport.co.uk.
And the title is One Thing All Parents and Coaches Should Know. What's the name of the athlete that's in this? Loris
Karius. So Loris Karius was the goalkeeper last week who in the Champions League final had an absolute nightmare. I was actually in Kiev watching the game as well. I'm a Liverpool supporter, so I was there watching. And the Liverpool goalkeeper made 2 of the biggest mistakes on such a huge global stage. And that article was contributed to us by an ex-professional golfer who is not a sports psychologist, but just somebody who has taken a real interest in, what's important and what we can and can't control, either as parents, coaches, or athletes. So it's an interesting read.
It definitely is, because I'm huge on being aware for myself of how I'm choosing to perceive a situation, or if I'm really feeling frustrated about something, it's like, okay, well, what am I thinking about this that's, how can I maybe think about it differently so that I'm not feeling just caught up in this frustration or upset about it. And so I thought it was really interesting because the article talks about how every athlete can think of a time when they weren't feeling the greatest, or they weren't necessarily on top of their game, or they weren't the calmest, and they still got a good result. And how every athlete can think of a time when they were feeling great and they were feeling calm and confident. All these things were right mentally, but then they still didn't perform for whatever reason. So I brought up some interesting questions about this theory of, if you control your thoughts and the way that you're feeling and all this stuff, then you'll perform well. So that was interesting to see in that. But what I love most about it was what he said as far as what there is to do after maybe your child has made this huge mistake, or someone on your team has had a rough game and they're maybe feeling upset about it, or people were commenting that he's gonna, lose sleep over it, or just always remember this forever, and so on and so forth. So I was curious because it was talking about how, there's really nothing to do except love this person and just support them basically, and surround them with that and let them process through it. So I was curious to see what your thoughts were on, that.
Yeah, well, that was quite a good piece of writing from him, because when we first spoke about doing the topic, he said it'll be very short because the answer is love him. and he was going to send me a 2-word blog. And I said, look, I don't think we could put that out there. We can't shortchange our visitors to the site. Look, I think the important thing there is, at the end of the day, it's a game of sport. I think the love them for who they are is still the most important. Mm-hmm. I think as parents, we can get caught up in the whole winning, losing, the here and now when it's gone wrong, and we look to make excuses for our children. We maybe feel embarrassed ourselves by what our children are doing. That puts us under pressure. It makes us slightly more stressed. And actually what it's saying is that if we're content as people, as parents, and we value the sporting experience for what it is, that our children are having fun, and this is the crucial one, that we don't define ourselves on the success of our children, then it allows us to take a deep breath, step back, and put the whole thing into perspective. You know, because being perfectly honest, okay, on a Saturday or Sunday when we're at match day and we've lost a game and it feels like the end of the world, and we get to Tuesday and actually, do you know what, that was a little under-11 football game that involved 12 people that the rest of the world don't know about. It sort of makes you then think, well, really, why was I quite so worked up in the first place? Mm-hmm. Having said that, one of the difficult things still is controlling human emotion. And I spoke to somebody else on a similar field today about that very article. And they said that if we're content as adults and we're content with who we are and our inner being is in a good place, they think that our behaviours around our child's sporting experience would improve anyway. So they were saying that it wasn't just about the resources that we provide and the talks that we maybe give to parents, but is there something that we can do to improve their own sort of well-being before they even start? And then we might see some changes in attitude and behaviour. It's a very different viewpoint. It's very unique. It's not out there, particularly, but there's a few people beginning to cotton onto it. And I think that there's some research beginning to show that there's something in it.
Yeah, I definitely would have to. Can you turn that off? I definitely would have to. I 100% agree with that. I feel like one of my biggest jobs every single day is to check on how I'm feeling. What are my, how that well-being, like inside and out. And I find that for me, at least, the better things are, taken care of there, like everything else is just kind of flows so much easier from there. It's just it changes how you interact, it changes how you respond to things. And I think that's exactly spot on. So I'm really excited that, other people you're talking to feel the same way as well.
But also I think, because what people don't see is from the sports parents' perspective, or coaches when they criticise parents or people that criticise sports parents, is that some of that behaviour actually probably has nothing to do with what's going on in the game itself. It's probably more to do with the fact that they've had a horrible week at work. They probably haven't got much money left. They've driven at 100 miles an hour to get the child to the experience. And when it doesn't quite go how they think it should, normal human emotion kicks in. And that's how people do react when they're stressed. So, it's trying to arrive at these trainings or these matches in a place where you see it for what it is, in that point here and now.
So I found it interesting earlier, you talked about clarifying that you do love, it's not that you don't love competition or, you're not competitive. Because I find that when I talk about, being respectful or carrying yourself in that manner as a coach or a parent, people seem to think that winning doesn't matter, or like, I don't value the competition side or high standards. They seem to think that, that means you're not setting high standards. It means you're not holding kids accountable. So do you find that tends to be some of the response when you talk about some of these things, that people feel like you're just like dumbing down the game or watering down the competition side of it?
Yeah, look, I think it's how you put across this information. Look, let's get one thing clear, that winning is important. Children do have to learn about winning and losing. There's nothing wrong with competition. The world's competitive. You go out into the job market now, the world is competitive. There's nothing wrong with competition. But what we've got to do, I think, when it comes to the sport, is just make sure that the whole emphasis isn't on winning. If we can encourage some of the character and life skills that will actually stand our children in good stead, whether they're playing sport or whether they're doing lots of other things, and our focus can be on celebrating the good bits of that, then we've got far more chance of producing decent people at the end. And actually, decent people will make decent sportsmen and women as well. And I think parents have just got to, if we can just wind back from the winning and say, well, actually, do you know what? How much effort did they put in today? That's something that we can control. Did they bounce up when they were hurt and continue? Did they show some resilience? When the game got tough, did they stick in there and show a bit of grit and determination? All these character traits will then move away from the sports field and actually stand them in good stead, outside of the game. And if we can celebrate those things as parents, because the reality is we can't control the outcome of a game. But, neither can professional sportsmen and women. They can do everything to influence the game, but they can't actually control a set of circumstances or an outcome. So it's really important that we praise the right things. And, could we ask our children, for example, to pack their bag or clean their boots? Now, you'll get lots of people who do that for them. Well, actually, we're not saying 7-year-olds should be, or 8-year-olds should be packing the bags. But what we're saying is, why don't you let your children have a go at doing it, and then you check it on the way out? Right. And if we're bringing in some of these traits like self-organisation and independence, it's only going to make them a better person. And I think if we can just change our focus off winning and what happens on the weekend to more celebrating lots of these little processes that will end up achieving outcomes anyway. This is what people have got to understand, is that if you get all these processes right, you'll win loads anyway. So actually one serves the purpose of the other if you still don't believe the winning argument.
Yeah, for sure. And I think you brought up an interesting point on why not let them have a chance at it. So a lot of people seem to think that either the parent's going to do everything for the child or the child has to do it all on their own without any help. And it's like, well, even that's a process. There's a lot of things that our kids learn where we're doing it for them at first, and then we're doing it with them, or we're inviting them to try to do more and more of it as they're more and more capable. And over time, they eventually can do it on their own. But we seem to forget that whole process, and we think there's only either the end or the beginning. And it's like there's so much more going on than just one or the other. So
look, it's tough as a parent, Stacey. You'll know this. It's tough watching your child fail. Yeah. But actually, in order to learn and grow, you have to put them in a position to fail, whether that be as a coaching community or whether that be a parent. And it's one of the toughest things to watch ever. It's an awful feeling. You feel sick. You feel like you want to jump in and help. And actually so much learning takes place during those moments if parents and coaches handle it in the right way.
Mm-hmm. So that's the other part of it, because some people will be like, yeah, you got to let them fail. But then when kids fail, then they respond as if it's not okay. So, we tell them this, like, failure is a part of the game and you need to make mistakes to learn. And then when they do that, then our response indicates that that's a problem instead of a step in the journey. So how do you, so when your child is, made a mistake, so 2 questions, and then we can wrap up. Yeah. One question is regarding how you respond or how you would like to respond when your child makes a mistake and they're feeling upset about it and so on. And the other question is in regards to what do you feel is a good approach when you see that your child isn't putting forth an effort, right? Because a lot of people are like, well, I don't get on them for mistakes, but if they're not trying, then yada, yada, yada. And you were talking about, praising the right things. So one is, how do you want to approach it? Maybe not how you do it all the time, but what's your goal as far as like how you would like to approach it when your child made a mistake and they're upset about that? And then the other one is, what do you do when you see that your child, for whatever reason, is not focused or not putting forth that effort, or, you know, that sort of thing?
Yeah, I think the first one, I've now got to the stage where what I've decided is that we can't change that moment. And so actually we've got to a stage now where I'm watching, and I've actually removed myself well away from it, and I just stand and watch. And it gives you time to reflect. You know, the reality is in lots of these youth sporting experiences, they're going to make millions of mistakes. You know, the more we yell at the mistake and more, it's just going to make the situation worse. So I try to give myself a bit of room. I don't get involved. And then the key to it afterwards is that I always ask my children what they made of the game. And I always ask them questions that allows them to reflect. You know, what did you think you did well? What do you think you maybe did not so well? What do you think you might do this week to make it better? Questions that give them ownership of the experience. So, right, and also as parents, that just because they give you an answer isn't an excuse for you to impart your world of knowledge for the next 20 minutes, you know, when you set off, because that's easy to do as well. So, look, we've gone down that line. It's worked quite well for us in terms of dealing with stuff, and also that once you realise that mistakes are a part of it, you just accept them for what they are. You accept them, that it's all just part of learning, and it's actually quite a nice attitude to have. You know, nobody's watching your child. I think a lot of parents, when they see the child make a mistake, what they're doing is watching their own child. They probably haven't even noticed it, really. I mean, they'll have spotted it, but they'll soon be on to the next thing, or the next thing their child's doing. And I think we've just got to, you know, just distance ourselves a little bit from the mistake and see it for what it is. Going back to the other one, the effort one's trickier, because one thing you can control, and I think one thing as parents, but after we've committed all this time, and we've taken our children, is we expect to see some effort. The reality is children don't necessarily buy into what we want to see. You know, if they've had a difficult week at school, or they're tired because they've had a few late nights, or the family have been out at the weekend and it's a couple of days later, sometimes they just don't want to do it. They just don't want to do it. And I think the best one on the effort is, look, if you get an odd session where you have a drop in effort, I would just leave it alone. I would just take it for what it is, one of those things, poor session. Mm-hmm. If it starts becoming more frequent, you know, 3 out of 4 sessions, I think you've got to look at, is your child actually enjoying the experience? And then if it just becomes a blatant, really not that bothered and down tools, we're probably at the stage where we maybe should be looking to explore something else, because they're all going to have bad sessions. They're all going to have days where they don't put in the effort that we perceive that they should be. But as I say, I think it's best to ignore unless it becomes frequent. Then I think you need to talk to your child about the experience, whether they're enjoying it. If it really becomes frequent, I think there may be better options.
Yeah, I love that. For sure. Yeah, I agree 100% with that. So, I mean, they're just like us, right? Sometimes we have a bad day or we're stressed out about something, and our own efforts as a parent are just not there either.
But so do professional sportsmen and women.
Right.
They don't operate at the same level every day.
Right. Yeah.
You know, so if it's good enough for them to have off days and bad days and not quite do it, then it should be good enough for a young child learning to enjoy a game.
For sure. So anything else that you want parents to hear today before we wrap it up?
Look, we'd like to hear from as many parents around the world as possible. Please visit our site, parentsinsport.co.uk. We're also on Facebook and Twitter at WWPIS. There's lots of content on there, lots of thought-provoking articles. Maybe there's something that you're unsure about. Please send us an email. And as I say, we'd just like to hear from as many people as possible.
Perfect. Awesome. So one last question before we go, because this podcast is called Eating Curveballs for Breakfast. Basically, I like to ask the guest about a recent or just a curveball that life has thrown you, or maybe sport has thrown you, or maybe parenting has thrown you that stands out in your mind, like something that's happened that you've learned something from, or just threw you for a loop for a bit.
Yeah, look, I'll tell you what, it's not recent, but it was one of the big reasons that we set up the site. So I take my son to a football session.
Mm-hmm.
I hadn't been to see him for 3 weeks because I'd been working really hard. So for me, it was the highlight of the month. Couldn't wait, really excited. Drove him half an hour to the football session. Was it the highlight of his month? No. Did he care that I hadn't seen him for 3 weeks? No. And we were in an environment where the children were 50 metres away. It was a football academy environment in the UK, and we weren't allowed to speak. And my son spent most of his game on the floor, not putting in that perceived effort that we've talked about. It was the highlight of my 3 weeks. And for the next hour and a half, unable to say anything or even gesticulate any kind of body language, it just got worse and worse. Well, you can imagine what it was like when we got back to the car. It was awful. And my conduct, my behaviour, absolutely awful. And do you know what? At that point, you then realised, oh my God, this is a 6-year-old. Oh my God, what am I actually doing with this? And it was a huge driving point to why we actually set up to try and just get parents just to think about where this experience actually lies in the grand scheme of things. And can we change behaviours just a little? Because for every little behaviour change we can make, we can have a huge impact on every child that we come across.
Yeah, I love that so much. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. It's been great talking to you. And I look forward to staying connected and sharing more articles from your website as well. So thank you so much for being here today. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Stacey. Really enjoyed it.